Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, and welcome to the twilight zone of abrupt climate change. Seem to be catching this, catching it quite a lot lately. This video may not be very long. There's quite a bit to cover, of course, but my time is short, so I'm going to do what I can. First of all, I wanted to read a comment, and I'm sorry if I destroy your name, sir. It's Etier Petier or Etier Petier or Petier, I don't know. Or Etier Petier. I have no idea. I'm sorry, man, if I'm mangling your name, but I'm going to read this comment. Dude, society is all telling you how to be a survivor by any means, how to conduct yourself in your relationships and economy. Every facet of your existence to be a survivor. That's the game they are laying on you. Under the threat of death, if you don't conduct yourself this way, you die. It comes from their belief of an ultimate ending of the individual, their self, and that has to be avoided. That's the ultimate goal. Now, if you come in and say, look, here's death, and you can't avoid it, that freaks them out, and you are out. Since that code is not in their survival 1.0 operating system, you telling them even their posthumous their offspring, are going to be dead, you are a pariah. That cannot be. All this effort, work, compromises, cheats, deception, subterfuge, all they did until now in the interest of survival is kaput. That's outside of the possibility. This idea is unbearable for them, so they have to kill you, i.e., you cannot compromise their environment anymore. That's what I think you meant. And since crucifixion is out of fashion these days, they just go away. This might appear that they have left you, but in reality, you have left them behind. If you look at them from this perspective, they appear small and silly, doing ridiculous things. They also appear robotic and zombie-like. Even when they have moments of clarity, they slide back very quickly into this mode. For me, they are entertainment at this point, just observing, not really engaging or confronting them. After a brief expose of what I think of the environment, etc., I can measure the individual's perception very quickly and communicate from then onward on his level. Since I have revealed myself already, not confrontational, they know what I'm about. Now it is on them to inquire if they are up for it, since they know. They usually quickly forget it and carry on as usual. You are not a threat to their survival 1.0 operating system. Now this is making you sort of a loner inside, since you can't really take too much of this bullshit for too long, so you tend to draw back into your own mindset. But you don't really miss them either. They come and go as they do. You welcome them, and when gone, you say goodbye to them. For you, things start to make sense on deeper levels. Everything you perceive gets a different quality, higher sensation. All the stuff art, philosophy, and maybe even religion was trying to tell, it is the process of enlightenment. And for that, you have to confront death first. And this climate change calamity is a very good device to get one moving on that. Bravo. That was right on. I like that comment. Thank you. Petier. Somebody else has sent me a video, which is interesting. I found it interesting until about 2/3 of the way through, and then I kind of zoned out. But I'm going to link this video. It's called Gatekeeping the Smart Grid. And I found it, some interesting commentary and somewhat informative, about where we're at. The last part of it, he kind of just started to get into, connect with people, connect with nature, and kind of repetitive on that end. So I stopped watching because I get it. But I'm going to link it below. I think it was interesting. I had a whole bunch of things to read, but I think what I'm going to do is basically read 2 articles. One is by Chris Hedges. It's from TruthDig. Saying Goodbye to Planet Earth. The spectacular rise of human civilization, its agrarian societies, cities, states, empires, and industrial and technological advances, ranging from irrigation and the use of metals to nuclear fusion, took place during the last 10,000 years after the last ice age. Much of North America was buried before the ice retreated under sheets 8 times the height of the Empire State Building. The tiny span of time on a planet that is 4.5 billion years old is known as the Holocene age. It now appears to be coming to an end with the refusal of our species to significantly curb the carbon emissions and pollutants that might cause human extinction. The human-induced change to the ecosystem, at least for many thousands of years, will probably make the biosphere inhospitable to most forms of life. The planet is transitioning under our onslaught to a new era called the Anthropocene. This era is the product of violent conquest, warfare, slavery, genocide, and the Industrial Revolution, which began about 200 years ago. Saw humans start to burn 100 million years of sunlight stored in the form of coal and petroleum. The numbers of humans climbed to over 7 billion. Air, water, ice, and rock, which are interdependent, changed. Temperatures climbed. The Anthropocene for humans and most other species will most likely conclude with extinction or a massive die-off, as well as climate conditions that will preclude most known life forms. We engineered our march toward collective suicide, although global warming was first identified in 1896 by the Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius. The failure to act to ameliorate global warming exposes the myth of human progress and the illusion that we are rational creatures. We ignore the wisdom of the past and the stark scientific facts before us. We are entranced by electronic hallucinations and burlesque acts, including those emanating from the centers of power, and this ensures our doom. Speak this unpleasant truth, and you are condemned by much of society. The mania for hope and magical thinking is as seductive in the industrial age as it was in pre-modern societies. Ate and Nemesis were minor deities who were evoked in ancient Greek drama. Those infected with hubris, the Greeks warned, lost touch with the sacred, believed they could defy fate or fortuna, and abandoned humility and virtue. They thought of themselves as gods. Their hubris blinded them to human limits and led them to carry out acts of suicidal folly embodied in the god Ate. This provoked the wrath of the gods. Divine retribution in the form of Nemesis led to tragedy and death, and then restored balance and order once those poisoned with hubris were eradicated. Too late, you see the path of wisdom. The chorus in the play Antigone tells Creon, ruler of Thebes, whose family has died because of his hubris. We're probably not the first time there's been a civilization in the universe. Adam Frank, a professor of astrophysics at the University of Rochester and the author of Light of the Stars, Alien Worlds and the Fate of the Earth, told me when we met in New York. The idea that we're destroying the planet gives us way too much credit, he went on. Certainly, we're pushing the Earth into a new era. If we look at the history of the biosphere, the history of life on Earth, in the long run, the Earth is just going to pick that up and do what is interesting for it. It will run new evolutionary experiments. We, on the other hand, may not be part of that experiment. Civilizations probably have arisen elsewhere in the universe, developed complex societies, and then died because of their own technological advances. Every star in the night sky is believed to be circled by planets, some 10 billion trillion of which astronomers such as Frank Drake estimate are hospitable to life. If you develop an industrial civilization like ours, the root is going to be the same. Adam Frank said you're going to have a hard time not triggering climate change. Astronomers call the inevitable death of advanced civilizations across the universe the Great Filter. Robin Hanson, in his essay, The Great Filter, Are We Almost Past It?, argues that advanced civilizations hit a wall or a barrier that makes continued existence impossible. The more that human society evolve, according to Hansen, the more they become energy intensive and ensure their own obliteration and endure it. This is why many astronomers theorize we have not encountered other advanced civilizations in the universe. They've destroyed themselves. For a civilization to destroy itself through nuclear war, it has to have certain emotional characteristics, Frank said. You can imagine certain civilizations saying, I'm not building those nuclear weapons. Those are crazy. But climate change, you can't get away from. If you build a civilization, you're using huge amounts of energy. The energy feeds back on the planet, and you're going to push yourself into a kind of Anthropocene. It's probably universal. Frank said our inability to project ourselves into the future beyond our own lifespan makes it hard for us to grasp the reality and consequences of severe climate change. Scenarios for dramatic climate change often center around the year 2100, when most adults living now will be dead. Although this projection may turn out to be overly optimistic given the accelerating rate of climate change it allows societies to ignore because it is outside their lifespan of most living adults, the slow motion tsunami that is occurring. We think we're not part of the biosphere, that we're above it, that we're special, Frank said. We're not special. We're the experiment that the biosphere is running now, he said. 100 million years ago, it was grassland. Grasslands were a new evolutionary innovation. They changed the planet, changed how the planet worked. Then the planet went on and did things with it. Industrial civilization is the latest experiment. We will keep being a part of that experiment, or with the way that we're pushing the biosphere, it will just move on without us. We have been sending probes to every other planet in the solar system for the last 60 years, he said. We have rovers running around on Mars. We've learned generically how planets work. From Venus, we've learned about the runaway greenhouse effect. On Venus, the temperature is 800 degrees. You can melt lead there. Mars is a totally dry, barren world now, but it used to have an ocean. It used to be a blue world. We have models that can predict the climate. I can predict the weather on Mars tomorrow via these climate models. People who think the only way we can understand climate is by studying the Earth now, that's completely untrue. These other worlds, Mars, Venus, Titan. Titan is a moon of Saturn that has an amazingly rich atmosphere. They all teach us how to think like a planet. They have taught us generically how planets behave. Frank points out that much of the configurations of the ecosystem on which we depend have not always been part of the planet's biosphere. This includes the Gulf Stream, which carries warm water and warm air up from Florida to Boston and out across the Atlantic. Hundreds of millions of people in some of the Earth's most technologically advanced cities rely on the mild climate delivered by the Gulf Stream, Frank writes in Light of the Stars. But the Gulf Stream is nothing more than a particular circulation pattern formed during a particular climate state the Earth settled into after the last ice age ended. It is not a permanent fixture of the planet. Everything we think about the Earth just happens to be this one moment we found it in, he told me. We're pushing it, the planet, and we're pushing it hard. We don't have much time to make these transitions. What people have to understand is that climate change is our cosmic adolescence. We should have expected this. The question is not, did we change the climate? It's, of course we changed the climate. What else did you expect to have happened? We're like a teenager who is given this power, who has been given this power over ourselves. Just like how you give a teenager the keys to the car, there's this moment where you're like, oh my God, I hope you make it. And that's what we are. Climate change is not a problem we have to make go away. In a sense that you don't make adolescence go away, Frank said. It is a dangerous transition that you have to navigate. The question is, are we smart enough to deal with the effects of our own power? Climate change is not a pollution problem. It's not like any environmental problem we faced before. In some sense, it's not an environmental problem, but a planetary transition. We've already pushed the Earth into it. We're going to have to evolve a new way of being a civilization, fundamentally. We will either evolve those group behaviors quickly, or the Earth will take what we've given it in terms of new climate states and move on and create new species, he said. Frank said, the mathematical models for the future of the planet. Ooh, this might be not that long. Frank said that mathematical models for the future of the planet have three trajectories. One is a massive die-off of perhaps 70% of the human population and then an uneasy stabilization. The second is complete collapse and extinction. The third is dramatic reconfiguration of human society to protect the biosphere and make it more diverse and productive, not for human beings, but for the health of the planet. This would include halting our consumption of fossil fuels, converting to a plant-based diet, dismantling the animal agriculture industry, as well as greening deserts and restoring rainforests. There is, Frank warned, a tipping point when the biosphere becomes so degraded no human activity will halt runaway climate change. He cites Venus again. The water on Venus got lost slowly, he said. The CO2 built up. There was no way to take it out of the atmosphere. It gets hotter. The fact that it gets hotter makes it even hotter, which makes it even hotter. That's what would happen in the collapse model. Planets have minds of their own. They are super complex systems. Once you get that ball rolling down the hill, this is the greatest fear. This is why we don't want to go past 2 degrees Celsius of climate change. We're scared that once you get past 2 degrees, the planet's own internal mechanisms kick in. The population comes down like a stone. A complete collapse. You lose the civilization entirely. And moving on, I'm going to read this Dar Jamail article from Truth Out. This is from today. And I think I'm going to call it a video after this one, because I have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, or dark 30, some like to call it. This is called 6 Mass Extinction Ushers in Record-Breaking Wildfires and Heat. There have been 5 mass extinctions on Earth, and it is scientific fact that we are well into the 6th mass extinction event. By far the worst of these was the Permian mass extinction that occurred roughly 252 million years ago. That one annihilated 95% of all life on Earth. During the Permian mass extinction, global warming caused by a massive amount of CO2 released from volcanism warmed both the oceans and the atmosphere, which then triggered the release of colossal amounts of methane that had been trapped underneath the ice in the Arctic. This caused an even greater spike in planetary warming, which wiped out nearly all life on Earth. In our current mass extinction event, however, rather than the CO2-caused warming coming from a volcano, it is anthropogenic, human-caused. And the climate is not just warming, it is disrupted. And this time, rather than the process of taking tens of thousands of years as it did during the Permian mass extinction, humans are increasing atmospheric CO2 levels far, far more rapidly. Whether or not humans go extinct remains to be seen, but there is no denying that sustaining 7.6 billion humans while we are forcing the extinction of between 150 and 200 other species each day and have pushed Earth's climate out of its natural state is very much in question. I've spoken to prestigious scientists both on and off the record who believe that sooner rather than later, global population will be reduced to around 1 billion humans. Whichever scenario runs its course, we are all facing massive loss in the future. It is only then can we decide what is truly important in our lives and how to comport ourselves as we go through our days. Just as warming seas caused the release of methane stores in the Arctic, driving the Permian mass extinction, we are now facing what appears to be a modern-day equivalent of this phenomenon. Sea surface temperatures in the Arctic are warming at stunning rates. To give you an idea, look at this blog containing images showing sea surface temperatures. And I've read this before. This is from Arctic News. Temperatures in one specific location near Svalbard for July 6th for each of the following years. 2014 was 0.8 C or 30.6 Fahrenheit. 2015, 6.2 C or 43.2 Fahrenheit. 2016, 8.3 C or 47 Fahrenheit. 2017, 14.4 C or 57.9 Fahrenheit. 2018, 16.6 C or 61.9 Fahrenheit. That rate of change is absurd. On July 3rd, 2018, the sea surface near Svalbard was as warm as 19.3 or 66.8 Fahrenheit. 13.9 C or 25 Fahrenheit warmer than it was during 1981 to 2011. Elsewhere in the Arctic, Sweden's highest mountain is no longer its highest mountain, thanks largely to anthropogenic climate disruption, as the top 13 feet of ice melted off of it. On July 30th, a Norwegian town 350 miles into the Arctic Circle saw the temperature reach 90 Fahrenheit. The trend is clear and should be very alarming to anyone who reads this. Christy Ashwanden, writing for 538, provided this synopsis on July 19th. It's only July, but it has already been a long, hot spring and summer. The contiguous U.S. endured the warmest May ever recorded in June. The average temperature was 1.7 degrees Celsius, or 3 degrees Fahrenheit, above the 20th century average. June was Earth's 5th warmest June ever recorded, and the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration found that the only warmer June months on record were 2016, 2015, 2017, 2014, in that order. Iowa, New Mexico, and Texas set record highs for their minimum temperatures in June, and as of July 3rd, nearly 30% of the lower 48 was experiencing drought conditions, and it's not just the U.S. During the first 5 months of 2018, nearly every continent experienced record warm temperatures, and May 2018 marked the 401st consecutive month in which temperatures exceeded the 20th century average. As if to underscore all of this, leading scientists recently published a study warning a domino effect of climate events could easily move Earth into a hothouse state, making any efforts to reduce emissions increasingly futile. The paper combines the consequences of 10 climate change processes, methane release in the Arctic, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, and the loss of coral reefs as a few examples, as each of these is a feedback loop that could amplify the other nine. While the authors stressed that their analysis was not conclusive, they warned The Guardian that this trajectory would almost certainly flood voltaic environments, increasing the risk of damage from coastal storms, and eliminate coral reefs and all of the benefits they provide for societies by the end of this century or earlier. Another climate researcher, Phil Williamson, put it this way: in the context of the summer of 2018, this is definitely not a case of crying wolf, raising a false alarm. The wolves are now in sight. Earth. Scientists recently pointed out how ACD is shifting the planet's seasons. Research spanning decades of satellite data has proven that human fossil fuel emissions are shifting what one researcher called the march of the seasons themselves. The researchers also stated that the odds of this occurring naturally and without human influence are approximately 5 in 1 million. As the planet relentlessly warms, the health of more than 1 billion people is at risk, due to their inability to stay cool from lack of air conditioning or refrigeration to cool and preserve food and medicine. The countries most at risk include Bangladesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, Mozambique, Sudan, Nigeria, Brazil, India, and China. Meanwhile, the ancient cedar trees of Lebanon, which are depicted on the national flag, and some of which are more than 1,000 years old, are succumbing to ACD. The trees depend on a cool, moist climate, but as temperatures increase and there is less moisture, the trees are migrating further upslope. By 2100, at the current trajectory, it is expected they will only exist on the higher mountains in the north of the country. Then after that, likely not at all. Humans are suffering other types of impacts from ACD in addition to the obvious extreme weather events, water issues, and political instability. A recent study has linked increasingly warm temperatures directly to an increase in suicide rates. The study showed that ACD impacts could be as significant as the impacts from economic recessions, which have already been shown to generate an increase in self-harm. For example, the study showed that suicide rates in Mexico rose by 2.1% when the average monthly temperature increased by 1°C. Ocean acidity will soon reach levels that have not been seen for 14 million years. Another study warned of ACD's looming mental health crisis. Things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, domestic abuse, all these things tend to go up in the aftermath of natural disasters. Psychologist Susan Clayton, a co-author of the study, told Wired magazine, as we have more natural disasters, one would expect to also have increases in those kinds of mental health consequences. A group of experts recently warned Congress that the U.S. is ill-prepared for the health challenges ACD is already bringing across the country. Things like insect-borne diseases, damage to hospitals from extreme weather events, and the impacts on impoverished areas are some of the primary concerns. The experts urged policymakers to invest in preparation plans, but so far it seems as though this advice has largely gone unheeded. The most profound impacts of runaway ACD are showing up in the oceans. This is having to do with water. Scientists recently revealed that ocean acidity will soon reach levels that have not been seen for 14 million years. Ocean acidification occurs when oceans absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, causing the water to have a lower pH, and was the key driver of a loss the loss of more than 90% of life on Earth during the Permian mass extinction event. A recently published study showed that fish will begin to lose their sense of smell as CO2 levels continue to rise and the oceans become increasingly acidic. This will change their behavior as their ability to search for food and avoid predators becomes impaired. In Canada, a glaciologist who was part of a recent published study pointed out how hundreds of glaciers in the Arctic are shrinking rapidly and are disappearing into what has been described as a city of icebergs. The study showed that between the years 2000 and 2016, 1,353 out of 1,773 glaciers have shrunk significantly. Meanwhile, that's most of them. Meanwhile, the oceans continue to warm. Sea surface temperatures near San Diego Scripps Pier recently logged the highest ocean temperature in its 102-year history of record keeping when temperatures registered 78.6 Fahrenheit. Warming oceans are also causing large species, including the hammerhead shark, to migrate from the Mediterranean and Spanish coastlines northward into British waters, a trend that will continue in the next few decades as waters continue to warm. As high temperatures and droughts continue to persist across the U.S. West, emergency measures have had to be employed to rescue wild horses across the overheated and parched region. Volunteer groups are working feverishly to haul in water and food to areas that no longer support vegetation in an effort to keep the horses alive. Due to the ongoing threat to its food supply, the country of El Salvador recently declared an emergency amidst an ongoing and severe drought in an effort to save farmers and food, as tens of thousands of farmers have lost their crops. Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull recently announced measures to assist farmers there who have been impacted by a severe drought and stated that the country is the land of droughts. Fire. ACD is making itself obvious in this realm across the Northern Hemisphere this summer. In Sweden, forest fires have raged across the country, including up into the Arctic Circle, where at least 11 blazed. They have been intense and widespread enough to cause authorities there to request international assistance. And it's not just Sweden. A weather station in northern Finland hit 91 Fahrenheit, and a professor of fire safety at Western Norway University of Applied Sciences called what was happening there the worst wildfire season in Scandinavia that can be remembered. A record heat wave was behind 31 fires in the Barents region of the Arctic alone. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe has been struggling with extremely hot temperatures and wildfires. At least 94 people died in Greece from the deadliest wildfires seen there in decades. Back in the U.S., the heart of Yosemite National Park was closed while crews battled massive wildfires in the area. It's the first time that part of the park had to be closed down since a 1990 wildfire caused the same. Elsewhere in California, a record-breaking wildfire spawned a tornado that packed more powerful winds than had ever been recorded in such phenomena. The National Weather Service estimated the fire tornado packed winds stronger than 143 miles per hour. This is historic. In the U.S., Craig Clements, director at the San Jose State University's Fire Weather Research Laboratory, told BuzzFeed News, "This might be the strongest fire-induced tornado-like circulation ever recorded. At the time of this writing, at least 10 people had been killed by fires across California, and the federal government declared the situation a natural disaster. One of the blazes has already become the largest in the state's history, and at least 12 other fires were burning at the time of this writing. Scientists have long since linked the increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires to ACD. Air. Summer temperatures across the northern hemisphere have been wreaking havoc. Japan has seen some of its highest temperatures ever recorded during a heat wave that killed at least 30 people and hospitalized more than 2,200. Elsewhere in Asia, recent research has shown that a large portion of China could literally become uninhabitable in the coming decades as heat waves are becoming progressively more intense. Across Europe, calls for assistance from farmers have been common as blistering heat has baked the continent and deep drought conditions persist. Temperatures across the continent have soared this summer. Sweden saw its hottest July in the last 260 years, along with its worst drought in 74 years. Northern Ireland and Wales saw their hottest June temperatures ever recorded. Berlin baked. The UK has been racked with wildfires, and Paris announced a heat alert. Death Valley, California broke its own record for the hottest full month ever recorded on the planet. It averaged 108.1 Fahrenheit for July. Ooh. breaking the previous record just set last year by half a degree. It is worth noting that the record that was set last year had broken a 100-year-old record. In many cases, the heat records were not simply beaten, they were obliterated. Think Progress reported about heat records across California recently. As the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported in Southern California, where temperature records go back 140 years, records for July 6 were disintegrated by 14 Fahrenheit in downtown Los Angeles and Camarillo, and by 16 Fahrenheit in San Luis Obispo. In Van Nuys, it hit 117 Fahrenheit, destroying the previous record for the day, 99 Fahrenheit, by an astounding 18 Fahrenheit, and that record was just set last year. Some reports are now warning that every weather event could possibly result in a state of emergency as ACD is amping up weather around the planet. This is unfortunately the new normal. Ahira Sanchez-Lugo, a physical scientist at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, told CBC News. When it comes to extreme heat, we can say the odds of the extreme heat or heat waves have been significantly increased by climate change, said Claire Nullis, spokesperson for the World Meteorological Organization. We have to start getting used to it. According to NOAA's June Global Climate Report, that month ended up being the 5th warmest such month on record. 4 of 6 continents had a June temperature that ranked among the 7 warmest Junes since continental records began in 1910, the report noted. As bad as all of this is, it will be made worse thanks to the policies of the Trump administration. The climate policies of his team, or lack thereof, will cause severe and deadly heat waves we are already seeing to become the new summer normal just over the next few decades. According to one report, the typical 5-day heat wave in the U.S. will become 12 Fahrenheit warmer by between 2036 and 2065 alone. And some heat waves could bring 131 Fahrenheit temperatures, the level above which the human body cannot continue to function properly, according to the U.S. National Climate Assessment. The report warned that much of the world, including the U.S., will begin to see huge, humid heat waves where the heat index reaches a fatal 131 Fahrenheit every other year by just the end of the century, not even to speak of what will occur after that. Denial and reality. The Trump administration continues its denial of ACD and persists in its efforts to eviscerate the natural environment and the national environment. Since the last dispatch, the administration has moved forward on plans to replace the Obama administration's climate plan aimed at cutting U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. The Trump plan is more of an all-in for the coal industry, in addition to having already withdrawn from the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. Hence, the U.S. now has no ACD plan. The Trump administration has also announced plans to weaken U.S. fuel efficiency laws and pollution standards and efforts in effect freezing rules that require cleaner, more efficient cars. This is another move toward dismantling Obama's plan to mitigate ACD. Furthermore, Congress recently authorized the inclusion of 6 icebreakers in the annual defense policy bill, since oil exploration, drilling in the Arctic is their chosen path instead of working to mitigate the impacts of ACD. Meanwhile, a recent study revealed that the Gulf Stream current, also known as the Atlantic Meridional overturning circulation, is slowing down due to ACD impacts. And this is expected to boost planetary warming for 20 years. Finally, to underscore everything that you've just read, a NOAA oceanographer warned that during a recent press call that even if humans ceased adding all CO2 to the atmosphere, the amount of CO2 there already is enough to cause the atmosphere to continue to warm for the next couple decades, maybe a century. The NOAA's State of the Climate in 2017 report states unequivocally that last year, Earth's atmosphere saw CO2 levels reach the highest levels in the modern atmospheric measurement record, and in ice core records dating back as far as 800,000 years. Furthermore, CO2 concentrations of methane and nitrous oxide, other impactful greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, also hit record highs. 2 very insightful articles by 2 of my favorite journalists. Pretty much summed it all up. There's not much more to add to it. That's where we're at, and that's what's happening. The hits just keep on coming. What can I say? That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so with the links below. Until next time, peace.